Greetings, Earthers, Martians, Belters, members of the OPA. Welcome to episode 23 of Expanse, the Unofficial podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker.
And I'm your host, Nikki Starwalker.
Welcome back, Nikki.
Thanks.
I think we're finally getting caught up now.
Yeah, I know. And this is going to be a great episode, too.
Yeah, so today we are discussing the 5th episode of Season 2 called Home. And yeah, we've been looking forward to talking about this one. It was actually kind of hard doing the last 2 episodes because we really just wanted to skip ahead to this one because this is when a lot of cool stuff happens.
As usual, we can jump right in. And in the last episode, we talked about Eros and the fact that it moved on its own. And the Nauvoo was heading toward it and it dodged. And now it's moving and it's moving fast. So everybody's basically in a panic, trying to figure out what to do about this.
So yeah, not only is Eros moving now, not just to get out of the way of the Nauvoo, but it seems to be going somewhere, but it's also putting out some heat. And we have some discussion about thermodynamics and acceleration and whatnot that I don't think we need to go into. Just suffice it to say that it's moving, it's putting out heat, and no one really understands how or why it's moving. This thing seems to be doing things that go beyond our understanding of physics and seem to be impossible. And yeah, like Nikki said, everybody's kind of freaking out. Everybody everywhere is freaking out about this, about it moving. It shouldn't be moving, but it is. And meanwhile, Naomi has the idea of, Miller's got this bomb that wants to go off, and maybe Miller can take it inside of Eros and get closer to where the protomolecule actually is. Maybe they can rig some kind of delay on it so he can get out of there, and then they can use this bomb to destroy the protomolecule.
Yeah.
At least that's the plan.
That's the plan. And I found it actually a little surprising that Naomi seemed to be believing that they could get Miller out after the bomb went off. I didn't see that as being very likely. I mean, Eros is moving pretty quickly, and after he releases the bomb, I don't know if there's like a timer on it or something, but he had to hold the button.
Well, yeah, right now the timer is set at a minute. So Naomi seems to think that she can somehow interface with the bomb remotely and rig it with a longer timer. But I'm with you. It seems like if she could do that, they would have done that before.
Right.
So I don't know if she's just kind of thinking, screw Miller or or what. But whatever the case may be, Miller agrees, and he starts making his way into Eros, dragging this bomb with him, which is kind of big and heavy and unwieldy, and we have a few kind of tense moments where he's trying to climb up shafts and drag the thing after him, and every time he lets go of it, this timer starts going off. So we definitely have some suspense and tension as Miller's trying to get this bomb where he needs to go.
Yeah, and Miller's not well as it is. So I mean, he seems weak, so it's hard for him to drag the bomb along with him as it is. He's on that radiation drugs.
Oh, right.
And he went through all of that radiation poisoning while he was on the station.
So while this is going on, back at Earth, people at the UN are arguing as they do about what to do. And Ehrenreich wants to just send a bunch of nukes to take out Eros because they figured out it seems to be heading towards Earth, which is, not good. I forget exactly how big they said it was, but it's quite a bit bigger than the asteroid that took out the dinosaurs. So, this is something that just the impact is going to wipe out billions of people. And then the nuclear winter that will follow is going to kill even more people. So this is really serious, and they don't have a lot of time to decide what to do about it. And people aren't digging Ehrenreich's idea because there's this very real possibility that if they hit it with a bunch of nukes, it's just going to break it into a bunch of little pieces instead of one big piece. Mm-hmm. And those are still going to hit Earth. and spread this protomolecule, whatever it is, all over Earth, which actually seems like it might be worse than just letting the whole thing hit. But, they don't have really time to argue about it. So they finally decide that's what they do. And again, I don't remember exactly how many missiles they launched, but it was a significant portion of all the missiles that Earth has.
Right.
It was like half of them or something.
Yeah.
So they launched these missiles. And, again, like what Nikki said at the end of our last episode, is it seems like Eros, or more specifically the protomolecule that's on Eros, is reacting to things happening around it and seems to sense these missiles coming and suddenly disappears from radar. So that means that the Roci, who's following after this thing, can't see it on radar anymore. And the missiles that are coming at it can't see it anymore. And these missiles are flying blind. They don't have any target lock now.
Right.
So there's this kind of oh shit moment when everybody at the UN realizes it's happened. And it's kind of like, well, we're kind of screwed now. And then they get a transmission from Fred, who says, I have a ship on the scene who can keep visual contact with this thing, paint it with a laser, and guide these missiles in. And of course, this creates quite an uproar at the UN, because in order for this plan to work, they have to give Fred navigational control over the missiles.
Right.
And of course, there are people who believe that this is all some kind of scheme, and this is Fred's plot to get them to launch all these missiles, give him control over them, and then he could use those to take out Mars, take out Earth, take out whatever he wants to, really.
Yeah.
Probably multiple targets. Like, he could just ruin everybody's day in the solar system with these missiles. So, it's like they have to decide whether or not they can trust Fred Johnson, whether this is all some kind of scheme he's cooked up to get control of the missiles. And it's pretty tense.
Yeah. And I like how Drummer was talking to Fred and said, you might be the most powerful man in the solar system right now.
Yeah. Leave it to Drummer to really boil it down to, yeah, you're kind of, you've got the big red button now.
Yep.
What are you going to do with it? So the people of the UN are arguing about this, and Avasarala is actually recommending that they trust Fred and kind of vouches for them. And it's at this point that they get a transmission from Holden on the Roci saying, hey guys, remember me? Guess who's on the ship that's following Eros?
Yeah.
It's me, Holden. Don't know if this just made your decision harder or easier.
Right.
But Avasarala vouches for him. She
Yeah.
says, I think we can trust him. And they decide to do this crazy plan. And they pass navigational control of the missiles over to Fred. And the Roci is staying close enough to Eros that they can see it just visually, because they can't detect it with their instruments anymore. And they put their targeting laser on it. And, one thing that's brought up at the UN is like, well, we did give them navigational control of the missiles, but we still have control of the warheads. So it's true, Fred can, send them wherever he wants, but we can disarm them remotely. Of course, it's funny, no one really brought this up, but it's like, well, what if Fred can hack into that and get control? But I guess nobody wanted to talk about that possibility.
Yeah, I think at least on Avasarala's part, sorry, I'm having trouble saying her name today, she found her decision to be a lot easier once she found out it was Holden. I think she thinks that she has Holden figured out.
Well, she saw, we had the scene in last season where she went and visited his mother. And, it kind of seemed like at least she thinks after talking to his mother that like she kind of understands him, like where he's coming from, why he does what he does. And, I'm just assuming that there was more to that scene that we didn't see, because it's hard for me to really accept that just from that little bit of dialogue that we saw, that she would have that kind of confidence in understanding his character. So yeah. I'm just assuming that there was more to that we didn't see,
Okay.
They didn't show us the whole conversation where, his mom showed him all his baby pictures. And his little footprints in the sidewalk and stuff like that.
His paintings on the fridge.
Yes. So, on Earth, people are evacuating just in case, things go badly. They're using every ship they have to get people off planet. And now we have a very, what I thought was a very powerful scene between Avasarala and her husband. And it was just a very heart-wrenching scene where they're kind of maybe having their last conversation before things go really badly for everybody. Because Avasarala decides to stay on Earth so that she can continue to deal with this situation. Notice that everybody else left.
Yeah.
But her.
Yeah, and she feels like if she left right now, her husband would not be able to respect her for making that decision. And it's admirable of her, but it was a very hard scene to watch.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of funny how they had the delay because remember her husband, I think his name is Arjun or something like that. He's on the moon right now. So there's a slight delay as, the signals go from the moon to Earth. And I thought it was kind of funny and kind of a window into Avasarala's personality that he keeps asking her to let him finish because she keeps walking over him with the delay and she never does. I don't know if you noticed that, but even, he's like, I need to say what I need to say and let me finish. And, she let him go on for a few sentences, but she actually ended up interrupting him yet again. And you saw him kind of like,
yeah,
like the woman never lets me talk. But yeah, that was a very emotional scene and phenomenal acting from both of those actors. I was getting a little misty-eyed watching that.
Me too. Yeah.
And it, kind of like Alex, that really helped to kind of bring the human factor back into this. And it's so easy to forget, just the normal people that are being impacted by this. And so this brief scene between Avasarala and her husband can kind of be a surrogate for all the other conversations that must be going on all over Earth as people realize, that this could be the end for a lot of people, maybe everybody.
Yeah, it brings it home.
So back on Eros, Miller is continuing to drag this bomb into Eros, looking for the protomolecule, and Naomi's kind of guiding him in, but he also has, looks like he has some kind of infrared sensor on his suit, and he's kind of going towards this heat source. So even when they briefly lose radio contact, he's able to keep following this heat source. And as he gets deeper and deeper into Eros, he's seeing the little, pieces of glowing protomolecule floating around in the air. And he starts hearing the voices of Eros, these voices that we've heard about before. But as he goes on, he starts hearing not just, random voices of people from Eros, but he starts hearing Julie's voice. Mm-hmm. And that was really cool. And I love how she keeps saying something like, can't catch the Razorback,
Yeah.
And it was really cool. And Miller starts to kind of put these pieces together. And he starts to think, I don't know that this is just this protomolecule just kind of regurgitating random phrases from the consciousness of the people it's absorbed, which is kind of up to now what they think is going on. They think it's just kind of random stuff. But he says, it seems like what she's saying kind of correlates to what's going on. She's talking about you can't catch the Razorback. Meanwhile, Eros is running away from the Roci and it keeps accelerating. And he thinks, I think maybe Julie's still here. Like there's some part of her consciousness that's still here and that maybe she's actually controlling Eros.
Yeah, and it's only him that would think of this. If anybody else was in that position, I don't think they would have put those pieces together. It shows that he has so much faith in her that he believes that she can still remain intact in some way after all of this happened to her. Her consciousness is still there.
I think it's really cool, the line he said where he's explaining this to Naomi, and he says something like, I think when the protomolecule infected her, she infected it back.
Yeah.
Like to him, Julie is just such a powerful force. And
Right.
it's like even this protomolecule couldn't escape her unscathed. And I thought that was super cool. It was a cool kind of glimpse of Miller, and also I think Julie and how he sees Julie, and also possibly, the strength of the human spirit, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm. Precisely.
And so Miller kind of thinks that Julie thinks she's on the Razorback racing, and she's racing the Rossi. And meanwhile on the Rossi, Eros keeps accelerating and the Rossi keeps accelerating. And they get to the point where Alex is like, we can keep up, but we're not, like, the Rossi can keep up, but we're not going to survive this. Like, we're going to start pulling G's to the point where we're going to have permanent damage. They get to the point where they hit like toxicity of the juice, which is this cocktail of chemicals and medicines that they use to survive higher G's. And they get to the point where the computer is warning Alex that, if you increase the dosage again, it's going to damage people, maybe even permanently. And there was this really cool moment where he's like, sorry guys. And he like hits the juice again, because they all decided, even Amos is on board with this. They all decided that we're going to risk our lives to keep up with Eros. And they are actually using the autopilot. So even once they lose consciousness or even die, the Rossi is going to stay with Eros as long as it can, keeping that laser on it. Because remember, all these missiles flying towards Eros are blind right now. And the only way they know where to go is this laser that the Rossi is shining like a flashlight, shining on Eros. So it's like, well, even once we lose consciousness, the Rossi is going to be controlled by computer. It's going to stay with Eros as long as it can, painting this laser on it. And it's really heroic, everybody on the Rossi is basically deciding that even if it kills us, we're going to keep up as long as we can. So Miller, meanwhile, kind of has this aha moment about what's going on and hearing Julie's voice. And he's trying to convince Alex to back off. He's basically like, Julie is racing the Rossi right now. And as long as you keep coming, she's going to keep going faster and faster. And if, on the other hand, if you back off, if you basically let her win the race, maybe I can get her to slow down. Maybe I can even get her to change direction and go somewhere other than Earth.
Right.
So, eventually, long story short, Alex and the others decide, okay, this is in Miller's hands now. And they ease off the throttle, and seems like it's none too soon. The G's are definitely having an impact on everyone on board. And yeah, now it's all up to Miller.
Yeah.
He's on his own.
There's a lot of trust being given in this episode. I mean, Mars has to trust the UN that they're not planning some war or something, or going to send the missiles to Mars. Right,
because, Avasarala, there's a moment where she says, hey, we need to let Mars know what's going on so they don't think we're sending all these missiles at them.
Right.
And because remember, they just blew up Deimos, so.
Exactly, yeah. And then the UN has to trust the OPA, basically.
And, well, Fred and Holden specifically.
Right. Yeah. And then, the people on the Rossi, the crew, has to trust Miller, because it's all up to Miller at this point.
And also, Fred has to trust Holden, because there was a moment where Holden's kind of a dick, I think. And he's like, basically radios Fred and is like, the situation has changed. We're dealing with it. You just have to trust me. And that's all he said. And Fred's kind of like, what the crap?
Yeah.
I'm like, I think Holden could have taken 30 seconds to tell Fred what was going on. But
right.
I think Holden just gets off on making people trust him.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, at the end, everybody on the Rossi's has to trust Miller, and that's kind of a big deal, because Miller's shown himself to be kind of a loose cannon, and there's been some conflict, especially between Miller and Holden. And so, it's kind of a big moment when they decide to put everything in Miller's hands.
Yeah. Yeah. And what happens next is amazing and really makes this episode incredible.
Well, before we get to that, we should point out that Miller also realizes, as he's following this heat signature, that it's taking him back to the Blue Falcon, which is the hotel where they found what was left of Julie. And he, this is kind of part of his realization that he thinks Julie's still there. And he's like, I have a feeling I'm going to end up back in that bathroom by that bathtub where we found Julie.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he sees a bird. And this bird is very familiar to us because he saw this bird when he was first investigating Julie's case.
Yeah, it's the sparrow that seems to be a constant symbol in the show.
That's right. Yeah, and it seems to be guiding him towards the motel. And I love it because it's not the actual bird, it's the protomolecule taking on this form. But you have to wonder, how does it know about this form? And how does it know to take this bird form to guide him?
Well, assuming that the bird isn't just a hallucination.
Ah, that's true.
Because he does, see images of Julie. So yeah, it's like, was that something the protomolecule was doing, or was that just Miller's imagination?
Very good point.
Or is Miller's imagination, does that have something to do with the protomolecule maybe?
Oh.
I don't know. Tell us what you think. expansepodcast@gmail.com. Let's see what people think about that. So yeah, Miller finally gets to the Blue Falcon and he finds Julie, or what's left of her.
Yeah, and her seems like her body is there, but it's actually the protomolecule taking on the shape of her body, but she does seem to be in it. Like her consciousness seems to be in this form.
Yeah, we could probably argue about what's going on there, but to me it seemed like it had inhabited and taken over her body, but it was still like that was her. It just had changed her, like mutated her quite a bit.
Right.
And, we're kind of thinking, that it was using her as almost like a template, to figure out our life form and how life works in this solar system and to build whatever it's building.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like maybe it was kind of, like we talked about last episode, how it was mimicking protein structures. So I'm almost kind of imagining that the protomolecule was going through her body and replicating it cell by cell or structure by structure.
Oh.
And so what we see there is like a protomolecule version of Julie's body, or like she's been transformed.
Right.
So almost like a change of state kind of thing or something.
Yeah. And so he actually introduces himself because I forgot that they don't even know each other.
No. But, there's been some weirdness going on because if you remember in the first season, when Julie is about to die, she actually has a vision where she sees Miller and the sparrow coming towards her. So, there's some interesting things going on between them. And, we may not know exactly yet what that is. And it may not be something that's ever explicitly explained. Mm-hmm. But there is some kind of connection between them even before now. But yeah, you're right. This is, he's like, hey, let me introduce myself. Feel like I know you, but never actually technically met you.
Right.
And she's like plugged into this thing. So her body almost seems to be floating or suspended in kind of this reclining position. And there are all these kind of like tentacles going from her body into the rest of the protomolecule. Mm-hmm. So it almost seems like she's almost like the brain or the central nervous system of this thing, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then we have our second really powerful emotional scene in the episode with Miller and Julie. And, he's talking to her. He's trying to explain what's going on. And especially in the beginning, she doesn't seem to know where she is or what's going on. Mm-hmm. She doesn't really seem aware of her surroundings at all until Miller comes in. And then she opens her eyes and she's like, where am I?
Yeah.
And, he explains what's going on. And, she's confused and she's frightened. And Miller is trying to get her to realize that, he thinks that she can control Eros. And he's trying to get her to go somewhere other than Earth. But Julie wants to go home. And this is why the episode is called Home, because in Julie's mind, she's going home.
Right.
And it's this really powerful moment where not only does Miller have to convince her to trust him, and part of that is he removes his helmet. And so now he's exposed to the protomolecule.
Right.
But he also, he has to make a connection with her, like a human connection, get her to trust him, get her to realize or believe in herself that she can control this thing that she doesn't think she can. And then on top of all of that, she wants to go home, and he has to convince her not to go home and to go somewhere else, which is not what she wants to do. And it's almost kind of heartbreaking, like him trying to, telling her, you can't go home. I'm sorry. I know this is what you want more than anything else, but you can't have it.
Yeah. Not only that, you can never go home again.
Right. Yeah. And, Miller's so cool because I like how Miller he doesn't bullshit.
Yeah.
There's the moment where she's like, what's going to happen? And most people would probably be like, oh, everything's going to be okay. And he is like, kind of like, you're going to be okay. But he says, we may die. Like,
Right.
He's bluntly honest. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. It's very likely we're going to die. But whatever happens, I'm here with you. You're not going to be alone. And somehow it's all going to be okay.
Yep. Yeah.
And I thought that was cool. And personally, me, if I was in a situation like that, I'd rather hear the blunt truth than something that I know is bullshit. You know what I mean?
Yep. No, I agree completely.
So the episode ends with Eros flying into Venus, which is Miller's idea of somewhere to go other than Earth, because Venus is uninhabited. There's nothing there. And, it's kind of on the way, sort of, it's in the ballpark.
Yeah.
And yeah, we see Eros plummeting into Venus, and we see the impact, and that's the end of the episode. And so, way back when, in the first season of the show, we talked about how there are numerous instances throughout the story of the Expanse where they raise the stakes, where it's like, you think you know what's going on, you think you know what the story is, you think you know where it's heading, and then something happens, and like the curtain is parted, and you realize that there's something much bigger going on. And this is one of those moments. I don't know what people have been thinking or theorizing who haven't read the books as far as what's going on with this protomolecule and what it is and what it's about and what this could lead to. But I think in this episode, seeing what happened to Julie, I think that a lot of people are realizing that there's things going on here beyond what they realized or what they expected. And now it's even more interesting what's going on with this protomolecule, what's it doing, what's going to come out of this. And I will tell you, this was a pretty big moment. This is one of those moments where you're like, oh my God, there's way more going on here than I thought. And this is nowhere near the last of those moments. There are still more coming, and each one is bigger than the one before. So I think the first moment like this was when we first kind of found out about the protomolecule in season 1. Mm-hmm. And at the very end, I think of the last episode, when we see it grab, what's his face, the spy, I don't remember his name.
Oh, yeah.
That was on the Rosie. And we realized that it seems to be alive. And remember the little protomolecules in the air, like made the kind of humanoid shape. And
right.
It seemed to almost be taunting him.
Yep.
And so that was our first glimpse that, hey, this is more than just some like disease or something. Like this seems to be alive and maybe even have consciousness or intelligence. And so that was a big, I think, like holy crap, this is deeper than I thought it was. And now this bit with Julie here is another one. And there are more coming. And each one kind of raises the stakes yet again.
Oh, that's exciting.
So as excited as you are now, you're going to be even more excited as things progress. I promise you. No spoilers, though. If you want to know, if you're like, oh, I wish he'd tell us, go read the books.
Right.
You can find out all about it if you want to read the books. So yeah, that's the end of this episode home. So Nikki, what was your favorite scene in this episode?
Oh, it was the end scene where he sees the bird and he's led back to Julie. And that was just so beautiful. And like you said, the conversation that they had was heart-wrenching, but honest. And I really liked how he said, you're not going to be alone in this. I'm not going to leave. Like, this is where I end up.
Right. And even going so far as to remove his helmet.
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree. I think the runner-up for me is the scene with Avasarala and her husband. And there are some similarities in the two scenes. But I think the one with Miller and Julie is just so much more powerful. And it has the sci-fi going on.
Right.
Which, I mean, the scene with Avasarala and her husband, that could have happened in almost any movie set in the present day, Right. But the thing with Miller and Julie, you're not going to see that in your average television show, something like that going on.
That's right. Yeah. And it just fit Miller's character so beautifully.
I just thought of something. There's some parallels. I didn't think of this until right now. There's some parallels between Julie and what was going on there and the Borg Queen from, what was that movie? The Star Trek movie, First Contact.
Oh, fascinating.
And how she was like kind of plugged in to everything. And she had like her Borg body that her head came down into.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of, I don't know if that was actually an homage to that or if it was just coincidence, but it kind of, now that I think of it, it kind of reminds me of that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was a super cool scene. And yeah, that was my favorite too. And just very powerful. And, what a great culmination of an arc for Miller and really for Julie too. And Julie got a lot less screen time, but we did see kind of the flashback of her on the ship when they first encountered the stealth ship. Mm-hmm. And, it was kind of out of order time-wise, but, we know kind of you can put the story together now of, she's on that ship and they're intercepting the stealth ship thinking that they have some kind of bioweapon. They're going to try to get it away from them so it can't be used against the OPA. And then we go to the very first scene of the show when she's locked up on the stealth ship all by herself and everybody else has been spaced or taken away or whatever. And, she breaks out, she takes the shuttle, ends up, in this hotel on Eros and is waiting for Dawes to come get her.
Yeah.
And he never does, dies alone. Well, now we know she didn't. Depends how you perceive death. But
right.
She didn't really die.
Yeah.
But dies alone. Dawes never comes. No one from the OPA ever comes to help her, even though, she did all this for them.
Right.
And then, I don't think Julie knows at this point, unless the protomolecule, or she found out through Miller at the end there. But, the person behind all this was her own father.
Right.
How tragic is that? Like, this is all because of her father. And he even knew what happened to her. And he was kind of like the whole, well, to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs kind of thing. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He wasn't even remorseful or sorry. He's like, oh, well,
Well, he did cry a little if you count it.
Yeah, but so what?
Yeah, it wasn't.
He wasn't remorseful. He wasn't sorry. If he had it to do over, he would have done it again.
Yeah.
Screw that guy. I hope there's a very graphic and slow and painful death for him in the future. That's all I'm saying. I'm looking forward to that. For him getting what's coming to him. At least in TV, we can see people get what they deserve. Yeah. And then, turns out that Julie's only true friend in all of this is Miller, a guy she's never met, who never met her, who was hired to kidnap her and bring her back to her father, who's, by the way, the one that killed her, really.
Right.
But in the process of him, trying to figure out what happened to her, he comes to admire her and respect her and ultimately fall in love with her without ever having met her.
Yeah.
And, and then finally now they're brought together and, he's there for her when Dawes wasn't, when her dad wasn't, when no one was.
Yeah. And she ultimately reaches out to him and says, "You belong with me."
Yeah. So yeah, it was a super powerful scene and such a great way to kind of bring all of this together. And yeah.
It was a great episode. I'm just glad that they didn't do this episode at the end of a season. After reading some of the scenes in the book, I assumed that this would happen at the end and be a cliffhanger. But it's only episode 5, so I only have to wait a week to see what happens next.
Yeah, I kind of was... I don't think we talked about this on the show because we didn't want to spoil anything, but I was predicting before season 1 even came out that this was going to be the end of season 1. Like this was going to be the end of season 1 cliffhanger.
Right.
And yeah, they surprised us. They didn't get as far as we thought they would.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because we've said more than once that the pacing of season 2 seems much more fast paced. But looking back at season 1, it's like I don't really think that they could have in 10 episodes gotten to this point. Like everything they did, they kind of needed to do. Mm-hmm. And I think if they would have tried to get to this point in 10 episodes, people would have been really confused about what was going on.
Yeah.
And even as it is, I think anyone who hasn't been watching every episode more than once or really paying attention probably needs to go back and rewatch some, if not all the episodes to really wrap their brain around everything that's happening. Because it's a lot to take in.
For sure.
But hopefully our podcast helps. Hopefully hearing our kind of summaries of the episodes and kind of, I think without even really meaning to or trying to, we tend to kind of separate the signal from the noise because we don't tend to talk about scenes that aren't terribly relevant. We tend to hit the bullet points,
Right.
So maybe if you don't have time to watch all the episodes multiple times, listening to this show kind of helps you kind of hold the whole story in your mind and realize everything that's going on because it's a little complex.
Oh yeah.
So good stuff. All right. So those are our favorite scenes. Once again, Nikki and I agree on our favorite scene. And Nikki, is there anything else you wanted to say about episode 5 Home?
Oh, it was great. Probably my favorite so far in the season. I mean,
in the season?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably mine too. Although when the Rosie took on the space station, that was pretty sweet. If they could have put that and the scene with Julie and Miller in the same episode, that would have been awesome. But yeah, probably this is my favorite too. And,
cool.
And I'm really excited to see what happens this week.
Mm-hmm.
So we're recording this on Tuesday. We've got the next episode comes out Wednesday? Tomorrow.
Yeah.
So hopefully Thursday we'll be recording our reactions to that episode.
Yeah.
So depending on when you listen to this, you might have already seen the next episode but right now we're very much looking forward to it and seeing what happens next.
Yes.
Before we wrap this up this week, I do want to mention that if you enjoy this show and you listen to this show and you would like to help support the show and keep the show going, a great way to do so is by becoming a patron. So we have a Patreon page, not just for this podcast, but for Star Walker Studios as a whole. We do other podcasts. And you can become a patron of the show. You pledge a certain amount every month, and you get some cool little bonuses and perks from us for doing so. For example, at the $5 level, so $5 a month, which is about $1 an episode, you get access to our Patron Cast, which is a special podcast we do every month just for the patrons.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. And we get to talk about things that we don't talk about on the podcast, such as our favorite TV shows.
Yeah, we talk about TV shows we're watching, movies that we enjoy, books that we're reading and enjoy. It's almost always all, genre related, science fiction, fantasy. So, we don't so much talk about The Expanse on that show because we have this,
Right.
But we talk about other shows that we're watching. Also at that $5 level, you get access to any bonus content that we provide, things like bloopers and outtakes, things like that, things that don't make it into the final edit of the show, but that we think patrons might enjoy. You also, if you listen to our other podcasts, GM Intrusions and or Game Master's Journey, you get access to the archived episodes of those shows. So the feed only has the most recent episodes. And so if you want to go all the way back to the beginning of those shows, then patrons can do that. And you get all that bonus audio content via a private RSS feed that you get access to as a patron. So you can subscribe to that using whatever podcast app you normally use and get automatic downloads of all the patron content into your app, just like any other podcast you'd subscribe to, like this one.
Yes, it's very convenient.
And finally, at the $5 level, we will thank you personally on a future episode of all the podcasts we're currently producing. So there are other patron levels that's kind of the entry level, but I think that's a lot of good stuff for $5 a month.
Oh yeah.
But if becoming a patron isn't your jam, there are lots of other great ways that you can help us out as well. You can make a one-time donation over on our website at starwalkerstudios.com. You can also use our Amazon referral link when you shop on Amazon. So you can just head to our support page on the website, which you can find a link to that at the bottom of the show notes for this or any of the episodes at starwalkerstudios.com. Click on that link, takes you to Amazon. You can buy whatever you want to buy. It's not going to cost you anything extra to use that link, but it helps us out a lot. And then finally, another great way that you can help us out and help support this show is to leave us a review on iTunes. If you use iTunes to get your podcast, leave us a review. We'd appreciate it. It helps new listeners find the show. And if you give us a 5-star review, we'll thank you on the show. So speaking of all of that, I do want to give a shout out to some new patrons that we've just gained in the last week or so. Shout out to Eloy Munoz. Sorry if I said that wrong. Christian Reyes, Paul Glass, and Darren Larson. And I also want to give a shout out to our Tier 4 patron, Steve Strickland. Steve's a big fan, and we're a big fan of Steve. So thank you to all the patrons for your support. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for making Star Walker Studios happen.
That's right, and keep us going. So that's going to wrap it up for us for episode 23 of Expanse, the unofficial podcast. Hope you enjoyed sharing Expanse fandom with us today. We'll be back soon with episode 24, discussing the next episode of The Expanse. And until then, conserve your oxygen and your water. Resources are scarce out in the outer solar system.
Invincible me.
Flip and burn, baby.
Donkey balls.
Doors and corners, kids. Doors and corners.